Golden Doves Class 224, we're at page 133. There is a symmetrical relationship between the written and the oral law. Interesting. So there's a symmetry between the written and oral law. Let's see what my father meant by that. This can best be understood by considering their respective levels of textuality. So you remember we discussed in chapter 4 about the different levels of textuality, right? So, for example, there's in the case of the oral law, let's say there's Mishnayot, which is accepted completely by the Benu HaKadosh Ubetino. Then there's Tanura Banan. Then there's Tanya, right? There's different levels of text. Whether a particular text has been recognized and accepted in the libraries of the various yeshivot, right? So the Mishnah reach the highest level of acceptance. So that's a level of textuality. Now also in the Chumash, in the Torah Shebechtav, you have the Chumash, which is the highest level of textuality. Then you have Nevi'im, Ketuvim. So each one has different levels of textuality. We discussed that in chapter 4, and I'm not going to repeat it here, but that's what it's referring to. On the one hand, the written law has a purely consonantal text, which defies enunciation, right? You can't pronounce the written text, can you? I mean, in order to pronounce the letters Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Taf, Bet Resh Aleph, Aleph Lamed He Mem, you need to first provide vowels to those consonants. Without vowels, you can't read it, right? So it's Bereshit Bara Elohim after you provide the vowels, right? Not before. So that's a written text. It's purely consonantal and has scriptural value. On the other hand, the oral law has a vocal text which is unwritable and therefore has no scriptural value. So scriptures, by definition, written law is something that's written, right? But there is no written text of the Mishnayot. There is no official written formulation of the Mishnayot. Nobody bothered to count the number of times, the number of letters in Masechet Berachot. And if somebody actually spent the time doing that, that would be a futile and meaningless exercise. But we know how to read the text, right? It's a readable text because it has vowels. So it can be enunciated. Isn't that interesting? There is writing without the possibility of enunciation, the Torah Shebichtav, and enunciation without the possibility of writing, the Torah Shebe'al Peh. So now you see the symmetry. So that's what my father meant by when he was talking about symmetry. He was talking about that symmetry. The point of contact between these mutually exclusive levels is the vocal version transmitted by the oral tradition of reading Keri'ah, the scripture, the written law. That's very interesting. So there is an overlap of, if you think of in terms of Venn diagram, is there an overlap between the Torah Shebichtav and Torah Shebe'al Peh? And the answer is yes. The overlap is in the vocal version, right? The vocalized version of the text. So I know to read Bereshit Bara Elohim. So that vocalized version of the text is a combination of Torah Shebichtav, because it has the consonants, right, of the original scripture, and it's Torah Shebe'al Peh, in as much as, how do I know how to read it? Well, there's a Torah Shebe'al Peh, a tradition to read it this way. So the point of contact between these mutually exclusive levels is the vocal version transmitted by the oral tradition of reading Keri'ah, the scripture, the written law. In reading, the reader mentally supplies the vowels to the consonantal text, right? Reading involves interaction between the reader and the text. So when you read the Torah, if you are the Koreh Torah, you read the Torah, and in your mind, you're providing the vowels for the text so that you can read it. So you have here an interaction between the reader and the text. In this fashion, the consonantal text acquires meaning, and that's what gives it meaning. Because until you provide the vowels, you can't read Bereshit, and therefore, what does it mean? What do the letters Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Shin Taf mean, right? So it's only after you give it vowels that it has meaning. The term for reading, Kiriah, is also a summons and a calling upon for signification. That's beautiful, by the way. Wow, that really is beautiful. So when you're koreh, you're calling for the meaning. You're saying, what does this mean? And you're koreh, you're calling for, like the same I would call Yaakov. And, Yaakov will hopefully answer. So I could call for the meaning of the text by supplying the consonantal, by supplying the vowels to the consonantal text. Hold on one second. Let's see. Where are we up to? Footnote 22. Just give me a moment here so I can find myself. Okay. Yeah, Pirush HaMishnayot. Okay. All right, getting back to the Bay text. The scriptural and vocal aspects of the law stem from Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu gave us both the written text and the Keri'ah text, or the vocal dimension of the text. The scriptural text was contained in the scrolls that he delivered to the children of Israel at the end of his mission, before they crossed into the Holy Land. Right, the Torah Shebichtav, as such, was only given to us in Perashat Vagelech, the very, very end. Initially, however, throughout the 40 years of the wandering in the desert, Moses delivered the text of the Torah vocally. That's very interesting. So we received the vocal text before we received the written text. That's amazing. Maimonides states that upon receiving the commandments orally from Moses, the people on their own would write the text on scrolls. So this is initially before we received the Torah Shebichtav from Moshe Rabbeinu at the consonantal level. People wrote what they learned from Moshe and Ohel Moed on their own scrolls. Meaning those mitzvot that Moshe Rabbeinu taught them Be'al Peh, they wrote it down on their own. It is important to note that knowledge of reading came at the end of the educational process. Maimonides further remarked that after copying the text on scrolls, the teachers would go out to teach and instruct in order that they should grasp that text and know how to read it. So this is, I guess, we call it the evolution, so to speak, of the Torah Shebichtav, starting from Moshe Rabbeinu descending Har Sinai, and then continuing through the 40 years in the desert. So during those 40 years, there was no Sefer Torah, but there were many scrolls which were studied and taught. Okay. A similar view appears in a poem written by Samak, 6th and 7th century, of the Jewish tribe of Nadir in Medina. The poet, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Kaib ibn al-Ashraf, who was associated with the same tribe, had been treacherously murdered on high orders for writing poems critical of Muhammad. Those Muslims, by the way, were relatively calm relative to the radical Muslims that they're bringing into the Western world to take over the West, I guess. I don't know why they would do that, but anyway. So he was murdered because he criticized Muhammad. Samak replied to the outrage. So Samak, a member of the same tribe, he replied to this. Part of his poem concerns the function of tradition. In 4 lines, he explained why Muhammad was unacceptable. The sages of the tribe had unanimously discarded him and enumerated the essentials of the Jewish scholar. This is great stuff. These are first, knowledge of tradition. The expression ilmun chabiru, traditional knowledge, is related to chabar, unformulated tradition. I like that. So there is the knowledge of the tradition. The second is command of the derasha methodology. Darisina is actually an Arabization of the Hebrew derasha, one of the many technical terms introduced by Jews into the Arabian Peninsula. The third essential is mastery and authority in the proper enunciation of the Torah, how to pronounce it. So just think of it. So first you have the tradition, the Masoret. That would be akin to Moshe Rabbeinu teaching the Jewish people in Ohel Moed, the laws, whatever those are, right? Then you have derasha methodology. And just saying, why does he bring that Rasha methodology second? I don't know. I'm not sure. But why bring that Rasha methodology second? The third essential is mastery of the proper enunciation of the Torah. It's almost like you first, you approach the text as an individual, interact with the text, but then there's the correct reading or the traditional reading of the text, and that's number 3. The word zuburu, actually usually associated with the Psalms, actually means writings, an exact translation of ketuvim, hagiographa. Knowledge of enunciation is not the basis for the right to apply derasha and transmit tradition. Exactly what I just said. Oh, so I was right. Right? Meaning, there is the personal interaction of the reader with the text at the consonantal level of the text. And then there is the traditional reading of the text for purposes of a public reading. Right? So it's a different dimension of the text. Rather, the opposite is the case, because one is the recipient of tradition, and as master of the derasha methodology, he possesses the knowledge to enunciate the scripture. So you might ask, so why do I even need tradition? So let me interact with the text. Why do I need the first step, which is you have to have mastery of tradition? And the answer is not every derasha is an acceptable derasha. There is such thing as what's called derasha shel dofi. So if you have a derasha shel dofi, a derasha that goes against our traditions, that derasha is not acceptable. So here we see the limitations of derasha. It's not a free-for-all. I can't make a derasha that says, really, you could light a fire on Shabbat. No, you can't light a fire on Shabbat, right? And so on, right? So we have the limitations. All right. The following is a transliteration and translation of these lines. I'm not going to read the Arabic version. I'm going to read the English translation of my father, alav hashalom. I see the scholars unanimously rejecting him, Muhammad, all of whom are the depository of traditional knowledge, the Hakamim. Yeah. They were the instructors of all knowledge. Through them, the Torah is enunciated and the writings. That's beautiful. That really is beautiful. So that takes us now to the next section, which is written in oral law. We are getting close to the end. So some nice, I don't know if you can see any of the dice foliage, but I'm sharing that with you because it is quite beautiful. And God is indeed an artist.